الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك تلقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening to our non-Muslim viewers. It's the Sulaimaan Ravat show once again. Beautiful Friday evening here in Johannesburg, and we are coming to you live from our studios in Sunninghill. So to all our viewers throughout the various parts of South Africa, Southern Africa and Africa, welcome, welcome, welcome. I suppose the week has been a very interesting one again. It's all about budget. That's what it was about this week. But I don't want to speak too much about the budget. The last 2 or 3 months, and I was saying to my producer Mohammed, I've had enough of Zuma and Ramaphosa and Gigaba and Gigabyte and Minister Candy Crush and all of those kind of things. We've spoken quite a bit about politics in the last few months. And the next few months, we're taking a bit of a breather. In between the key issues, we will bring back onto the program, because next year, almost already from the end of this year, it's going to be an election year once again in South Africa, and then the tempo will be upped with regards to politics. So yes, we're putting politics on the back burner for a while, and today we're discussing something very, very important, and that is how to deal with depression and anxiety. It's one of those things in the community that is not often spoken about, or it's not spoken about as often as it should be spoken about. People tend to think that it's something that you deal with very privately. It's something that you need to discuss very discreetly. And we know the nature of life. There are ebbs and flows. There are highs and lows. There are peaks and valleys. And at times, things do become a bit overwhelming. And at times, maybe it's not that. It's something else. You just don't understand what's happening to you. Why you're feeling down? Why you're feeling depressed? So if you're one of those who perhaps thinks or considers yourself as depressed, then yes, the program's for you. But it's for all of us, because we function as a community, as society, as families, as couples, as people of the same household, as people of the same unit. So we need to understand these things so that it helps us to understand people and the difficulties and the challenges and the issues that they are facing, so that whether it's with regards ourselves or it's with regards others, we are in the know, we are informed. So we've got a jam-packed lineup for you this evening. Our first guest in studio with us, Bradley Daniels, a clinical psychologist. Then we're going to be touching base with one of the counselors at the Islamic Care Line, just to get a perspective of how many cases they deal with in the Muslim community. What are some of the observations that they've made with regards to depression and anxiety. And then the last half of the program tomorrow is the major Quran memorization competition finals taking place up the road here at the Nizamiya Masjid in Midrand. So we're going to focus a little bit on that, and we'll be speaking to one of the coordinators and getting some perspective, because tomorrow, the entire day, ITV will be broadcasting live from Nizamiya, and you'll be able to tune into that finals. It's exciting. Last year they didn't have it, but they had it 11 times prior to that. And I know ITV has been quite involved with that. So that's the lineup. 1 hour is never enough, as we always say. So let's get stuck in. Let's get right to it. Bradley Daniels, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Good evening. Welcome to ITV.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you and to your listeners.
Let me ask you a very basic question, if I may. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist? Many times I think people don't know the exact difference.
Sure. I think that's probably a good question to start with. So what we have to look at firstly is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who then went on to specialize to particularly look at psychiatric illnesses. So to be the same as a specialization, for example, as a gynecologist is a specialist, or a dermatologist is a specialist. A psychologist, so that is a broad category, and so we basically start to look at the different kinds of categories we find there. But a psychologist, that title is very specific. The title means that it's somebody that has at least a master's level education, as well as the relevant practical training as is regulated by the Health Professions Council of South Africa. So both psychiatrists and psychologists are regulated by the HPCSA. So that's the common factor. So we both have an interest in mental health, but from different perspectives. So as psychologists, our focus is to look more at using things like psychotherapy and counseling to assist with mental illness. But the understanding of mental illness across both fields is the same. It's just the intervention that is different, and also the interventions also work together. And then we need to also understand that within the category of psychologists, we have different kinds of psychologists. So if I can just roughly put it this way, it's a bit, I always say to people, imagine it like the profession of accounting, where you've got a bookkeeper, you've got an accountant, you've got an auditor, and you've got a CA. So for example, in psychology, you have, for example, a counseling psychologist who basically is somebody who works more with normal life problems over a short-term lifespan. Whereas an educational psychologist is somebody who looks at psychology in the perspective of development. In other words, you'll normally in South Africa find them restricted or working often in schooling environments, but their specialization is around development and also around how people learn. So that's basically where you find educational psychologists. And then research psychologists do not work with patients. So research psychologists work with, for example, understanding psychological concepts, such as, for example, how do we understand stress? How do we understand depression? Which scales do we use to understand or measure a phenomenon? I mean, then we also get, for example, we also would get the clinical psychologist, which is the category that I am part of, and so that is looking more at not only normal life problems, but also looks at abnormal phenomena. So for example, looking at pathology or psychopathology as we call it, and also clinical psychologists are also the ones that work more long term with patients in terms of doing psychotherapy as opposed to just counseling. So counseling is a supportive measure and intervention, and usually short term. Whereas psychotherapy, we're looking at restructuring through intervention the psyche or the psychic makeup. So when I use the word psychic, it's not in terms of like, sort of the magic-y stuff. It's really around the person's psychological structure. So in other words, we are addressing the actual root of the problem as opposed to just managing the symptoms thereof. So that's probably a good lay of the land.
Yeah, no, that was quite good. I think you gave us a good overview and you put things into perspective. Just before we take our first break, to get the terminologies out of the way. So how would we define depression? How would we define anxiety? What would be the differences? What would be the similarities?
Okay, so that's rather putting me on the spot before a break, but let's do the best that we can. So we'll try to fill the gaps as we go along. I think for me it's very important on platforms such as these that people have a simpler or the simplest understanding, but also accurate understanding of any sort of mental illness. So that's the first thing. Let's look at the word mental illness. And there's a lot of people have a lot of sort of fear around it and a lot of stigma around it. But I mean, if you have a cold or a flu or cancer or anything else like that, there's no real judgment around it. But somehow there's still a stigma around mental illness. So depression, to put it quite simply, we can say that depression is it's a disorder that affects the mood of the person. So that's an important word to remember. It affects the mood of the person. So formally we would say it's a major depressive episode or disorder. And what that basically means is that, for example, if you imagine, we use this word very often in layman's terms, saying, I feel so depressed, I feel so... What we mean is we're sad usually, but depressed is a different kind of sadness. It's a more chronic kind of sadness, and it really is a level higher than sadness. So for example, it affects people's biopsychosocial ability to function, and that is an important criteria that has to be met in order to be given the diagnosis of depression. So also where our diagnoses come from, they come from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, of which there have been 5 versions, and so currently we're on version 5, and that is used globally, so it's the same anywhere in the world, and that will give us the set criteria that we look for before we can make a diagnosis of any illness. So go back to anxiety now. So anxiety, obviously, as the word says, it's an anxiety disorder, and there's many different forms of anxiety disorders. And this is where people are more struck with the fear, the worry. But it's not just, I have an exam, I'm a bit anxious about an exam. Because look, I have anxious, maybe my stomach feels a bit queasy, maybe I'm perspiring a little bit more, but I still get to write the exam, and I get through it, and usually people pass. So that's just normal. I'm sort of a bit concerned, I'm a bit, a bit anxious. The anxiety disorders we're talking about is crippling to people. So people literally are unable to work, to live, and as we often also say, to love. So basically it's saying they're unable to perform their occupation, they're unable to perform their daily activities of living, and as well as sort of their social functioning. So for example, people are unable to have their family life or their community life or their social life because it isolates people. And if we use this opportunity to now start going into Or maybe we should park that for a little bit
let's
later.
park that. Let's take the break and then we'll come back. We'll continue the discussion. Right, so we're talking about depression and anxiety. Quick break, and when we come back, we continue the discussion.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حب جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حب.
Welcome back. Dealing with depression and anxiety. One of those topics that we don't always talk about, but we need to talk about. We need to understand the phenomenon. Now, Bradley, if I'm understanding correctly, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, in simplistic terms, would it be correct to say that depression has more to do with what has happened and anxiety is more to do with what's happening and could possibly happen?
I mean, that would be a fair it would be a fair way to kind of look at it. I mean, anecdotally, people often say, depression has to do with the past and anxiety has to do with the future or what's to come. But I think we need to be a little bit more specific around it. So let's look at symptomatology, or just the symptoms, to put it quite simply. So when people are depressed, so these are some of the things that we would see. So one is people would have a lower mood. So the mood would be lower than usual, right? So we're talking about sadness, happiness, how you feel. It's just your general sense of how you feel in the world, right? People would have a change, and I also must add, the changes must be significant. So that is what is going to give us the criteria to make a diagnosis. So it has to be significant. So a change in appetite. Now, a change in appetite will be more or less, right? But it's a significant change. A change in sleep patterns. It can be either more sleep or less sleep, but it must be significant as well, right? We're looking at a loss of interest in things like that you normally enjoy, or what we call like your activities of pleasure. So if you're a sports person, suddenly you wouldn't really get that much pleasure from playing sports. So if you're somebody that socializes a lot, maybe you don't get the same pleasure out of it. So it goes down significantly again. Then we also just, so we put all those things together. It may also come with, for example, physiological phenomenology. So in other words, people may have a sense of pains and aches. We may also see a change in concentration, being unable to concentrate on what is needing to be done in a particular point in time. So those are sort of some of the features that we're looking for. I want to put in a caveat and say that it's important that viewers understand that sometimes we can be really sad, and we can be sad for good grounds. So, for example, with loss or grief, there's a process that people go through, and the sense of feeling depressed is part of that process. Even the DSM, which is what we spoke about before, the DSM-5, is very clear to say that unless there are other reasons or cultural factors that can account for the behavior, we would not give the diagnosis. So, for example, in the instance where somebody is suffering from grief, we wouldn't immediately jump to the sort of diagnostic criteria to say the person is depressed. However, the features may be similar. So if you think about somebody, I mean, we've all experienced loss at some time in our lives. And it's not just loss of a loved one. It can also be loss of a job, loss of a status, or many different things that can lead us to a sense of feeling grief or feeling deep sadness. So in the past, we used to sort of look at depression and say, well, what's caused it? We spent a lot of time trying to understand what caused it and trying to understand if it is caused by the person's body's own factors, or whether it's caused by external factors, or reactive depression as it is called. But in terms of best practice these days, we say that if the person meets the criteria, that is enough to start looking at treating the person. So, because the reality is depression also has a physiological reality in the body. So, for example, if we look at the fact that it impacts the brain. So if we were able to look at brain scans of a person who's depressed versus a person who's not depressed, we would see that the person that is not depressed would have the brain scan would light up. And if it is somebody who is depressed, that brain will just be kind of dark. It will be like a dark city, if you imagine. Because the brain is just a constellation of neural networks.
So your mental state of mind and your emotional state of mind then has an impact and an effect on your physical well-being.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is an age-old psychological question or philosophical question about the mind and the body, and whether the mind and the body are one. And these days we say there's such a huge interaction between the mind and the body that if the one is impacted by something, the other will too. So let's, for example, look, without getting too complicated or technical, but let's look at, for example, people who have physiological illnesses. Let's take something like cancer, for example. So the reality is that cancer is a It's a multifocal disorder because it's got the physiological side, but we also know that it's got a financial side, it's got a social side, and also it has a psychological side because it's people's bodies are altered, their ability for their body to function normally is changed, and that is also a loss. It's a loss of functioning, as we speak about, and that can be depressing if you just think about it from from a very lay person's point of view. If you think about the things that make us sad, there's a lot of things that make us sad, such as the loss of a job, a loss of a relationship, a loss of money, many of those kinds of things. Does it always lead to depression? The answer is no. But can it lead to depression? Yes, it can. So this is where it's important for us to look at the fact that depression is also a constellation of genetic factors. So in other words, is there a history of depression in your family? If you look back a couple of generations and see, look, maybe grandfather had it, grandmother had it. The problem that we often find in practice is that because it's not something that most people understand, and it's also currently the language is becoming more accessible to people with things like the internet and with education and with shows such as these. It's becoming more accessible to people. And sometimes I would listen in the practice to patients speak, and then we'd talk, and they go, wait a minute. If I think back to it, my grandmother had kind of similar behavior, but she was never in a psychiatric facility, so therefore nobody ever knows the label. Yeah.
In your opinion, how, in terms of cases, right? I'm not saying that you should share statistics as such, but just broadly speaking, how much of it has got to do with events in a person's life and happenings, and how much of it has got to do purely with, as you say, genetics or chemical imbalances or those kind of things? So one is people become depressed or anxious because of what's happening or what's not happening, or loss or that kind of thing. And the other is it's just happening, even though everything's going well in your life. It's a kind of medical phenomenon from within.
So this word is important to remember. It's biopsychosocial. So, in terms of how we look at this model now, we're looking at illnesses through three paradigms all in one. So we're looking at it biologically, so in other words, physiologically what's happening with you. We're looking at it psychologically, we're looking at it socially as well. So with depression, for example, it has several different impacts on the body. So in other words, depression also impacts the immune system of all, because fundamentally what happens is the person slows down. The whole body tends to slow down, so everything slows down. And also one of the important things we need to know is that many mental illnesses, but particularly depression, creates a high risk factor for suicide, for people to actually commit suicide. And in sort of reading up and just preparing for the show, I tried to look at some of the statistics. So I tried to look at statistics for globally, and of course depression is more widely reported in the first world, particularly in the United States. So a lot of the figures you look at, it will tell you about what's happening in the United States. If you look at the World Health Organization, which basically accounts for, if I can remember the figure correctly, but it is something like 450 million people globally that suffer from depression. And they also, you were talking about economics and politics. Depression is an important factor in the economy as well, because depression also leads to a lack of productivity for people. People are losing work hours. It impacts the economy directly. So often people would, be out of work because they've got one or other ailment, but the reality is that they are depressed. And if we look at what I've said to you earlier in terms of people's concentration levels are changed due to depression. So if you're in a job that requires you to concentrate, which most jobs do, it means that your concentration and therefore your productivity is going to be much lower. And I also then looked at figures for South Africa, and this is what I found quite interesting. There was I can't remember who did the paper, but basically what I found interesting, and this is how we can see the link with politics and also people's mental state, because between 1993, which is an important year because 1994 has just happened, to I think the study was till 2017, and what it suggested is that the incidence of depression increased by 50% in that time period. Right? So, we don't really know. I wasn't able to really analyze the study in much detail to find out why that's the case. But what we can say, so we look at just what's happened recently. You're a journalist, and I think you like these matters. But if you look at recently, also the state of flux in South Africa as well. Politics does affect people's mental state of being. So think about it. If you're having, you're dealing with a limited financial household, you're dealing with social problems in your family and all those things, and then you're having issues in the state as well, it doesn't make for lower incidence of mental health. If you look at Johannesburg as a reality, which is where we are broadcasting from today, in Johannesburg, where it's a high stress environment and those kinds of things. So add all of that on top of it. So there is also a link between stress and general mental health outcomes. But I think it's important that we also look at the anxiety side of things as well. So, and speak about those symptoms. Because with anxiety, so let's look at how the symptoms are slightly different. With anxiety, people will have a sense of feeling anxious or fearful a lot of the time. They may have some physiological symptoms such as clammy hands, cold feet. Often what we find is sort of an increased heart palpitations. And what happens in many settings is that people say, oh, my heart, and I can't breathe, and those kinds of things. And just often they would go to a doctor and it would just be, okay, let's check your heart, and we'll find that there's probably nothing wrong with your heart. And that's where we need to start investigating further. But people should always tend to the physiological, because it could just be your heart, right? So you can't just say, oh, it's probably just I'm anxious about, but you should take it quite seriously. The minute it starts to cripple your performance, that's when you really need to seek professional
So
help.
normal nervousness is fine, it's part of human experience, but as you say, once it starts crippling you, once it starts overwhelming you, that's when it becomes, that's when the alarm bells ought to ring.
Absolutely.
All right, now we're almost out of time. I want to talk a little bit about treatment.
Sure.
How much of the treatment has got to do with kind of allowing the person to speak, helping the person to boost the emotional sense of well-being, mental sense of well-being, and how much of it is reliant on direct medication?
Sure. Okay, so this is we have to do this quite accurately, just to give people a good sense in the shortest possible time. So let's take depression first. That's the easier one, right? And so with depression, depending on the severity of the depression, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. So if it is mild, we can start off by basically trying to use psychotherapy or counseling to help the person to maybe look at what is causing them to be depressed, what's the actual causative factors. But we can also rely on medication, which comes from a psychiatrist or any doctor that's able to prescribe. However, I always would recommend, for my patients, certainly I always recommend that we do this psychopharmacological intervention through a psychiatrist. And that's purely because it's important for people to be on the right drug, to be on the right quantity, because it almost has to be tailored for you as an individual, with looking at your own body factors, looking at what your needs are. Whereas sometimes I find that in a sort of general practice space, people are obviously getting the right treatment, but it's not, sometimes GPs don't have the time to manage the subtle nuances. And that's why I always definitely would work in my team. I work with a psychiatrist for my patients. With anxiety, the situation is slightly different. With anxiety, the best practice is that we do treat it with medication, just because the risk factors are so much higher with anxiety. However, it does not mean that the person should be reliant on medication for the rest of their lives. Best case solution is that we want the person to start learning other skills around managing anxieties. For example, things like mindfulness helps with anxiety. There's also a methodology which I use, which is called brain working recursive therapy, which basically helps people to be able to get rid of things such as fears, anxieties, and those are also linked. We haven't spoken much about that, but fears and anxieties and phobias all sit in the same cluster as well.
Quick last question. Like we have with physical well-being, so you would hear doctors saying, right, if you don't want to have heart problems, do this to mitigate the risk. If you don't want to have cancer, do these things.
Yes.
What can be done to mitigate the risk of having issues and challenges with regards to your mental health, be it depression or anxiety or anything else?
Sure. I think today we just touched the surface, which is which is the start at least. But we again remember the words biopsychosocial. So, and healthy living is going to make most things different. So eat well, get exercise. So the things that a doctor would tell you about your physical body, those things are important, because it also regulates the neurotransmitters in and hormones and those things in your body, which help you to feel better. In terms of having a good social support structure. So not everyone wants to talk to everyone about all their business, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, now I often say in the practice, when I see people for the first time, I say, so if you had a problem, who are the people you'd pick up the phone to? And that's my means of assessing whether they have a good social support. Because what we do know is that people that have stronger social support tend to recover much better than from any illness, whether it is physiological or psychologically, than people who don't have social support. So it is important that people have a trusted friend or perhaps an institution. For example, our religious institutions and those kinds of things can also be places. And I think I'm a huge advocate for combining spirituality or religion with better mental health, because as mental health practitioners, we also can use people such as imams and rabbis and other religious members to be able to have the basic knowledge so that they can at least get people to professional help, such as myself and colleagues.
Badly fascinating stuff, really. I actually wish we had more time to unpack it even further, but we will definitely get you in studio on another occasion and take the discussion further. But thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sulaimaan.
All right, time for another break. When we come back, we continue. Welcome back. So we're talking about dealing with depression and anxiety. Before the break, we had Bradley Daniels in studio. He's a clinical psychologist. He was giving us the mainstream expert perspective on the issue. We now have on the line Shahida Adam from the Islamic Care Line. Shahida, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa jazakallah khair for inviting Islamic Care Line to your show this evening.
Now, in terms of the Muslim community, how prevalent is depression and anxiety? How many cases, and I don't want the numbers per se, but if you can just give us some idea in terms of how often you have people coming to the likes of the Care Line and Helpline and others suffering from symptoms of depression and anxiety?
No, coming up with statistics was quite hard because, there's the very limited ways that in the Muslim community that we're actually doing this right now and that we're recording it. But suffice to say, as any other community, the Muslim community is affected by this, as any other South African community as well. We are definitely affected by this. I mean, I know numbers, we don't have that much accurate numbers at this point, but approximately about 30% of South Africans are affected by a mental disorder in their lifetime, and the Muslim community would fall under that. So under Islamic Care Line, I would say regularly during the month we have a few cases at least where one person or a family member would present a mental disorder, specifically depression and anxiety. It usually comes up as an underlying cause of a presenting issue that the couple or the family member or the person would come to us for. So for example, if we have a breakdown of family structure, and once we actually look at it, then we can recognize that, okay, one of the parties here is suffering from perhaps depression or anxiety or a different kind of a mental disorder. We're also very strict in terms of recognizing depression as a diagnosed condition versus people who sort of self-diagnose themselves that I am depressed and I'm feeling depressed, but we don't have a clinical diagnosis. So we have to make a distinction there.
So would you say that you find in the Muslim community in particular people on either one of two extremes, those who don't know that they are depressed or don't know that they are suffering from anxiety-related issues because of a lack of awareness, and those who self-diagnose, who perhaps take day-to-day problems, up and downs and fluctuation of emotions that's almost par for the course, and just assume that they are depressed? Shahida, are you with us still? Oh, we seem to have lost Shahida. Okay, we'll try and get her back on the line. That's Shahida Adam from the Islamic Care Line. You see, as I mentioned in my introduction, that the reason why we are discussing this topic is that it's a real issue. There are people there who are dealing with day-to-day fluctuation of emotions, sadness, mood swings. They're not sure whether they're depressed or not, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety. And there are those people who are suffering from it and they don't realize, and as a result they can't seek the relevant treatment. And there are those who are not suffering from it and they assume that they are. It's almost like they want to be, so that there's an excuse for the way that they are feeling, or for them not having to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. So we can't be on either one of the two extremes. We can't be in denial about it, nor can we just continue as if it doesn't exist. All right, Shahida, can you hear me now loud and clear?
Yes, I apologize. I'm not sure what happened there.
No, it's fine. I was saying that do you find people on either one of those two extremes? Those who just assume they are depressed whilst they're actually dealing with problems that are more common and has got to do with the normal fluctuation of emotions, and then those who are depressed but don't realize it?
I won't necessarily say that they're only of those two extremes. There are those who are also in the middle, but we definitely have people presenting on both ends, as you have said. within the community, there's also a stigma related to depression and anxiety. So there is perhaps a lack of willingness to actually accept this diagnosis and to work with it and to sort of seek help for it as well. There are those who may, because it may be seen as a trend at some point to talk about depression or people are depressed. So people may sort of self-diagnose, like you said, and then accept that as a condition where it's not necessarily something that is relevant to them at that point, or it's not something that they can be diagnosed with. So they would hold on to that, and then it may also cause an unnecessary effect on their lives and affect the quality of their lives for no real reason in terms of the self-diagnosis. Then, like you said, on the other end also, where we have people who would accept it as well, and then they would not really want to go and seek help, or not want to recognize the impact that it's having in their lives.
Now, in terms of some of the root causes, when you sit and you have your consults with those who are suffering from depression or suffering from anxiety, in the main, what are some of the root causes, some of the contributing factors?
The contributing factors, like the general disorder itself and general depression, we would recognize it in terms of that. If we look at something like anxiety, like Bradley was saying earlier, if you look at the community that we're living in, the environment that we're living in, the families that we're living in, things like trauma, things like substance abuse, family backgrounds, genetics even. If you look at that, those are some of the root causes that can lead to these conditions. If we look at lack of coping skills, general, also obviously not forgetting the chemical imbalance there, the chemicals, the biological makeup of the body that tends to lead also to clinical depression as well. We would recognize that as well. But, having said that, we realize that when we come across a client where we suspect even some form of depression, or we suspect anxiety in terms of along the anxiety spectrum disorder, we then immediately have to refer them out to get a clinical diagnosis. And if I'm a canine, we do not do the clinical diagnosis at all. So we work hand in hand with other practitioners, like clinical psychologists or medical doctors, who will be able to then give us the diagnosis, and then we can work a way forward with the client.
Now, in terms of those who are depressed because of circumstances and issues, and those who are depressed purely because of medical reasons, it's a chemical imbalance or it's some sort of a genetic issue, which one of the two do you find in the majority?
I would find the ones that we see would be more in terms of the lifestyle and the living conditions and that kind of a thing, and the environment that they come from. Purely medical clinical depression, we tend to refer it out. So we don't really keep contact with that, and we don't really keep track of that. As long as we know that the person is now referred to the relevant service provider. In terms of the people that we see, then we would look at that in terms of counseling. Like Bradley explained earlier, the difference between counseling and then psychotherapy. Counseling is more along short-term and more supportive, and also enabling a person's coping skills to cope with whatever it is that they're presenting. So when if I can just explain a little bit about counseling, as a starting block, we would always try to understand who's the person in front of us. Who is my client, or who is my family, or who is the couple that's with me? And then we start looking at the presenting issues that they're giving us. So why are they actually, what is the issues that they're going to present forward? What are they saying are the problems that they're experiencing? And then we try to understand it and what's going on and what's the underlying issue. Once we understand that, and then we start looking at, okay, now a way forward.
Lastly, Shweta, before I let you go, in terms of the aspects pertaining to depression and anxiety, I read somewhere, I just want to see if this ties up with your experience at the care line, that even though we've made all these advancements with technology and life, technologically speaking, has become easier, is it true when people say that these days you find more people depressed?
It's a bit difficult to say. Look, understandably now, people are coming more forward. There is a bit more openness and a bit more acceptance in seeking help. So the numbers will obviously increase, and we are finding that. But generally, if we look at the lifestyle also, we're talking about our community lives. We recognize that the change in community lives, the fast-paced lives that we're living, our breakdown of the greater family structure, the impact of technology on our lives, and the pressures, the social pressures that have increased, the financial pressures that have increased, and like Bradley was explaining also about politics and community and the overall society that we live in, we tend to find that it does cause a greater stress upon people, and it does tend to lead to greater depression. and greater rates of depression in our communities as well.
All right, Shahida, Jazakumullah for your time. Much appreciated.
I mean, you're welcome. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That was Shahida Adam from the Islamic Care Line. Now, I want to just, share some perspective from, the religious angle or the spiritual angle. One is that you have the depression that is as a result of clinical factors, right? So either it's a genetic issue or it's some chemical imbalance. So from my understanding, that's more a medical issue and it is treated medically. In the same way that you've got cancer or that you've got diabetes or something like that. Your spirituality plays a part there in terms of, helping you through that process, through that medical process. So like your spirituality will help you when you're dealing with cancer or you're dealing with heart attack related issues or those kind of things. But I want to focus more on the other one, and that is the depression that is as a result of happenings in your life, events in your life, circumstances in your life. Now, either it will be, some major setback. You lost a loved one, or you had some major setback in your life, you lost a job, or your business folded or something like that. So either it's a major setback, or it's some sort of failure. You're trying to do something and you failed at it. Maybe it was marriage and you failed at it. Or it's just small things that have an accumulative effect. So I would say, broadly speaking, those are the three kind of contributing factors that would lead to a person being depressed. But the one thing we must understand, and we touched on this with Bradley as well, that depression is a heavy word. Sometimes we use it just when we're not feeling in the best of moods. That's normal. Fluctuation in your moods, being happy, being sad, that's normal. Life has its ups and downs. This is the nature of dunya. In Jannah, you will be just perpetually happy and there will be a constant. And there will be times in your life when you'll be feeling very sad, like when you lose someone close to you, right? You're going to feel very sad. But are you necessarily clinically depressed? I think it becomes a problem when it cripples you, when you can no longer function any longer for a significant period of time. So maybe husband and wife have a fight, and for that day, both of them can't function well. I don't think that we could say that they are now in need of medication or they are in need of clinical treatment. It's a short space of time, something happened. You lose somebody close to you for a period of time, you cannot function optimally, but then it's a grieving process and you overcome it. But if it cripples you, if it overwhelms you for a significant period of time, then it means you're not dealing with it properly and you're allowing it to get the better of you. Now, what are some of the spiritual and the religious solutions or tips that we can give? First and foremost, understand that all conditions and all circumstances and all happenings in your life come from Allah. Allah decided why it is the way it is. Understand that. There is wisdom in the system of Allah. Sure, you're feeling pain, you're feeling grief, you're feeling a sense of loss, but reinforce your belief in taqdeer, that Allah knows why it's happening and Allah knows best. And Allah will not give me more than what I can deal with. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah will not give me more than what I can deal with. Also, many times Allah puts us through difficulty because He wants to remove sin. He wants to wipe off sin. Allah puts us through difficulty because Allah wants to give us a stage in Jannah higher than what our deeds actually will make us eligible for. So these happenings in our lives, yes, it will make us sad, but we need to reinforce our belief in the system of Allah, in the decree of Allah, and seek assistance from Allah and understand that as long as I'm going to go through this, I'm going to get reward for bearing it patiently. Also, another very important thing that we need to do is think of the positives in your life. So there may have been one major setback. Now, one of the ways of protecting yourself from becoming depressed and allowing it to overwhelm you, or one of the ways of coming out of the depression, look at the many other positives in your life. Compare yourself to the sufferings of others. Tell yourself, you know what? I would take my life with all of its problems any day as compared to a mother who's got to look after her children in Ghouta with the bombs flying all over the place. And sometimes Allah puts us through these circumstances because Allah wants us to reconnect with Him, to strengthen our relationship with Him. So He wants us to make more dhikr because dhikr brings calmness to the heart. He wants us to make more dua because dua brings you closer to Allah. But ultimately, know that Allah won't test you more than what you can withstand. Allah knows why you're experiencing a particular happening in your life at a particular time. Yes, you'll feel sad, but Islam gives you the power and the tools to deal with it. Islam gives you the knowledge and the perspective to be able to ensure that it doesn't cripple you. So to feel sad, to feel down is not a problem in itself. It's for you not to allow it to cripple you, to get the better of you, to become hopeless, not to be able to function. These are just a few points. We're going to play you a clip now, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, where he talks along these lines, and you'll find further solution in this, inshallah. And then we'll go for a break and we come back. Then the final segment of the program, we speak to Muhammad Wadi about the Quran memorization competition tomorrow.
have to realize everything that's happening is from Allah. You know, you don't get depressed. People, if you forget about Allah, you end up getting depressed. You think things are black and they're gloomy. No, we don't believe this. We believe in happy endings. The root of Western civilization is tragedy. If you look at the major masterpieces of Western literature, they're all tragic. They have horrible endings. Everybody dies. That's not the Muslim view. Our stories in the Quran, they're all good endings. If you look in the Quran, they're good endings. People, the good guys, the good people win. No matter how bleak it looks out there, it's dunya. You're in the lowest. Dunya means the lowest place. A dunya. We're on the bottom. There's only up from here. Really, there's only up. This place, wallahi, all of you, I'll give you sincere advice, and myself. This place is designed to break your heart. It was designed that way. If you're looking to be happy in the dunya, you're in the wrong place. If Allah gave you a horrible spouse, you can get out of it, and He might give you another horrible spouse. Or you don't find a spouse, and then you're lonely and you wish you were with your horrible spouse, because at least being with him or her, there was somebody to talk to. And then He might make you happy, but you look, how many wealthy people do you know that have a lot of wealth, who have children that are in tribulation, who have sons that are completely wayward? Or really, look out there. People are in tribulation. You think you're looking at him because he has a big house, he has nice Mercedes. If you were in his shoes, you might say, I want to be back in my old shoes, even though they have holes in them. Because at least I can sleep at night. In his shoes, I have to take all these pills to go to sleep. Everybody has their tribulations. And it's very rare, people that have happy time, wonderful life, all that, those people are rare, and they're just ayah min ayatillah. That's all they are. But Ibn Abbas said, أصل الدنيا الابتلاء فإذا أنعمكم الله فهي نعمة على النعمة. The foundation of dunya is tribulation. So if you're in ni'mah, which is still an ibtila, but it's easier in some ways, and in some ways it's not, because it's easier to forget Allah when things go well. It's much more difficult to forget Allah when things are difficult. And that's why the Sahaba said, الرخاء لا تعقبها إلا الشدة. When things are easy, they're always followed by hard times. Whereas when things are hard, they're always followed by easy times. So they prefer to be waiting for the ease than to be waiting for the hardship. Because it's a hadith, and it's Hasan. أفضل العبادة انتظار الفرج. The best worship is waiting for the ease from Allah to come when you're in hardship. So if Muslims would just have that perspective, they would realize that if I'm just patient here with all these tribulations, I'm in ibadah. You could just be sitting in your house. And if you're muhtasib with Allah, you're in ibadah. But if you're there complaining and woe is me and everything's horrible and it's doom and gloom and it's all black and it's all dark, Allah will give you more things to complain about. And He'll give you some real things to complain about, because there's a hadith, if you complain about small calamities, Allah gives you great calamities. And that's why Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said that in every niqmah, there are 3 ni'mah. In every tribulation, there are 3 blessings. And the first one is that it could be worse than it is. And that's a ni'mah, yushkar alayh. That it's in your worldly matters and not in your deen. Like if you lose money, it's money. But if you lose deen, you lost everything. So that's a ni'mah. If it's لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا. I mean, if you think about it, He didn't say لا تصبنا. Do you see the dua? He didn't say لا تصبنا يا Allah, don't give us any calamities. He said لا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا. Don't give us tribulation in our deen. We're going to get tribulation. And we know that, because that's the nature of dunya. لِيَبْلُوكُمْ. So you're going to get tribulation. But don't make it in deen. Make it in dunya. So that's a ni'mah. If you lost your job, alhamdulillah, I didn't miss my prayers. Alhamdulillah, I didn't lose my iman. Alhamdulillah, there's wudu and a place to pray. Because jobs come and go. But deen, once it's gone, Allahu alam if you'll ever get it back. And then the final one, it's in this world, it's fi dunya wa la fil akhirah. As long as the musibah is in this world, it's a ni'mah. Because the real musibah is the musibah in the next world. So if you look at that and realize that we're in blessing, wallahi, the whole lot of us. Some maybe more than others outwardly, more observable, but the whole ummah is in blessing. Wallahi, the whole thing. Palestine, Kashmir, Shishan, everywhere. We're in ni'mah. And you have to see it. You have to see it. Because we have ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَا مَوْلَى لَهُمْ. You know, the people of Kuffar, they have no Lord. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as long as you have Allah, they can't take anything away from you. كُلُّ مَا تَهْوَاهُ مَوْجُودٌ فِي ذَاتِ اللَّهِ. Everything you desire exists with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you have Allah, you have everything you desire. If you don't have Allah, nothing you desire will make you happy. Nothing. It'll all in the end bring you misery. Wallahi. And that's the truth. It's not a lie.
Subhanallah, what beautiful advice is there by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. If you're feeling depressed, that will help you to put things into perspective and to understand how you are still blessed. And if you're not feeling depressed, it will help you to protect yourself against falling into depression. And that has been our topic for the major part of the show. We take a break, and when we come back, we're speaking to Muhammad Wadi from the South African National Quran Committee. Well, over the years, we have on numerous occasions spoken to Muhammad Wadi, Kari Bashir Patel, Moulana Muhammad Sidat and others about the South African National Quran Memorization Competition and how it takes place in various provinces of the country, and then the finalists from the different provinces come to the grand finale. And for the last few years, or the last few editions, it has been taking place at the Nizamiya Masjid in Midrand. Well, it's time once again, and this time it's the 12th annual Quran memorization competition finals. And just to put things into perspective for us, we are joined by one of the national coordinators, Muhammad Wadi. Muhammad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh Sulaimaan.
There's been a bit of a longer break this time around as compared to previous years. There wasn't one last year. There is one early this year. I'm sure everything is set and ready to go. I'm sure you guys are very excited, mashallah.
Yes, alhamdulillah. Look, we had a long year last year with regard to the regionals, and then obviously the year coming to an end with examinations. So we've done it to the 12 competition. The weather is better as well, and excitement is, really at an all-time high. Contestants are nervous. I think they've got the itching in their stomach, etc. And people are ready. People are working at the masjid, setting up. So I think everyone is anxious and can't wait for tomorrow morning, inshallah.
Inshallah. Now we know we've got the three broad categories, 5 juz, 15 juz, and then full Quran. Is it more or less the same this time around? Any changes this year?
No, it is exactly the same, like we normally have in airs that you mentioned as well. But on the other hand, and there's obviously more news will be given tomorrow, but this competition will be the last competition that has got this current structure. And I don't want to spoil a surprise. There's a new announcement that's coming where the competition format will change and will include many more people, inshallah ta'ala. And then we're going to be launching an award as well for future, which is the Uthman bin Affan Award for dedicated service to the Noble Quran. Now, this is not just for anyone that recites the Quran beautiful, etc., but it is specifically meant for people that have served the Quran in South Africa, whether past or present, and have changed, can I say, the landscape of Quran in the country. So it could be that upper that taught in grade 1 or grade 2, and you found that there's hundreds of ulama and people that have graduated through a class and now have become academics in the different sciences of the Noble Quran.
Anything in specific that you would encourage the viewers to look out for tomorrow?
Look, first of all, we don't encourage viewership, we encourage presence. So we're hoping that people come. And then obviously the second option, and maybe the best option, because we are speaking on ITV, is for people to tune in to the Quran competition. It's a fantastic experience to see how these young future leaders recite the Quran and how well they have memorized it with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But under the pressure and the bright lights and the people and, the judges being from the best of the reciters of the Holy Quran in South Africa, they are still able to read from the Quran without any hesitation and with people asking them from anywhere that they've memorized. The pressure is great, but this shows that, the ability and the strength that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has afforded them.
So just give us the timings tomorrow. What time does it start? When are the different sessions? Who will be the judges?
Okay, inshallah ta'ala, our judges is Farayub Esad, Qari Bashir Patel, and we've got a newcomer, Qari Ismail Abdul Aziz from Pietermaritzburg, and we've got Sheikh Abdullah Awaluddin, who's the head of the Department of Quranic Affairs for the MDC in Cape Town. The competition commences at 9 o'clock in the morning, our first session until Dhuhr time, which would consist of the 5 juz category and the 15 juz category. And then in the evening we have the full Quran category, which is the highlight of the competition and the ceremonials. We've got 2 guests that are, it's really an honor to be able to host them. One is Mufti Ismail Meng, who would be our celebrity master of ceremony. And the other person is, inshallah, we have got Deputy Minister of Education and Surti, who has been a very strong and, dedicated supporter of the National Quran competition, and especially him coming from the background of education and knows how the memorization of the Quran has lent a very great hand to students. So, and the Surti would be there as well, and it's an honor for us to host him as our guest of honor.
Right, Muhammad, all the best, and may Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant the competition all the success and all the barakah.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh Sulaimaan, and let us not forget about you as well, that obviously for many years you've dedicated your time to the Quran competition. We have always been there and always been present for it. So you're also as much part of the Quran competition as anyone else.
No, indeed. Jazakumullah so much, and we'll talk tomorrow, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That was Hafiz Muhammad Wadi from the South African National Quran Committee. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, you'll be able to watch proceedings live on ITV until Dhuhr time, and then after Asr again until late in the evening. Definitely something to follow. I hope you enjoyed that program on depression. I hope it was informative and educational. As we said, there's a stigma around it, and there shouldn't be. We need to understand what it is exactly from a medical perspective, what it is from an emotional perspective and a religious perspective, and how best to approach it. Well, time has run out on us. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جميل المساعي وامنح الناس حبك